the darkened corners of our minds, where fear thrives and nightmares reign, there lies a tale waiting to consume us whole. Brace yourself, for within these words lies the gateway to a world where terror knows no bounds.
The old warehouse district was supposed to be abandoned, which made it a prime spot for urban explorers like me to sneak in after dark. Armed with my camera and tripod, I lived for the thrill of capturing the haunting beauty of decaying, forgotten places far off the beaten path. When the grainy security footage from one of my late-night excursions first appeared on the local news, attached to reports of a grisly, unsolved homicide, an icy chill shot through me. There was no mistaking it. The crumbling factory I had trespassed into 2 nights prior was the same location where a body had been discovered, viciously mutilated, throat slit, face beaten beyond recognition. I'd come across my fair share of needles, graffiti, and other signs of squatters when prowling through abandoned buildings over the years. But a fresh crime scene, the notion rocked me to my very core. What if my footage, by sheer chance, had inadvertently recorded something crucial related to the murder? I needed to review everything I'd captured, if only to put my paranoia to rest. After repeatedly zooming in on various sections of grainy night vision video, a cold sweat broke out down my back. There it was, unmistakable against the surreal green glow. The hulking silhouette of a person framed in one of the warehouse windows, only visible for a split second before blending back into the shadows. I watched the clip over and over, scanning each pixel for any other potentially damning movement or shapes. My mind raced as I reached again for the well-worn prepaid burner phone dedicated solely for my off-limits explorations. No way was I going to risk the cops tracing this back to me, not with what I now knew. But they had to see this footage, if only for their case. Anonymously, I sent the clips along to an archived tip line before having second thoughts and tossing the phone in my wood stove to purge all records of our interaction. For a few days after that, everywhere I went felt like I was being watched from just beyond my peripheral vision. Shadows took on ominous new shapes in familiar places. The hairs on the back of my neck were permanently standing on end. But soon the paranoia subsided and I wrote it off as first-time nerves related to stumbling across something so grim. 5 days later, the rest of the footage hit the fan. Security stills from another decrepit factory a few blocks away showed a massive, powerfully built figure in a hooded sweatshirt stalking the empty loading dock, the very location where my videos had been captured. It wasn't long before a voice distorter-rendered 911 call dumped to the media revealed vague yet credible references to an underground crime circuit, vying for control of the warehouse district. So the anonymous tips I'd thought would be a good deed had clearly caught someone's attention. The worst possible someone, if these underground rumblings were anything to go by. On a petty level, my heart sank at the thought of the exhilarating urban exploration days being over, as I'd surely be watched or tracked if I revisited any abandoned spots. But deeper inside, I felt the first insidious trickles of fear settling in. Those shadowy figures glimpsed only fleetingly in my videos started to take on more disturbing forms, nightmarish specters haunting my dreams, accompanied by the sickening white noise of some growling ancient language. My waking hours became a haze of looking over my shoulder at every turn, hyper-aware of anyone who might have their eye on me. The intense bout of paranoia culminated one early spring evening as the sun began to set and I strolled home alone from the cafe where I worked. Footsteps somewhere just behind me had me whipping around, heart in my throat, only to spot a burly silhouette drifting along in the opposite direction. My whole body sagged with relief, until the person abruptly stopped and turned a hulking frame to face me from beneath the canopy of a hooded jacket. In a blind panic, I turned and sprinted in the opposite direction, ears ringing with the roaring of my own pulse. The figure didn't give chase that I could tell, but I ran until my lungs burned and legs turned to jelly, putting as much distance between us as possible. Safe within my apartment at last, I collapsed on the floor, gasping for air between waves of cold sweats and nausea. That's when I noticed the note, just a crumpled slip of paper on my welcome mat, weighed down with a charm from my keychain that had clearly been removed. 3 simple words, spelled out in harsh block letters. We know where. Despite calling in sick for the next 2 shifts and staying glued to home, I knew I couldn't simply hide from this any longer. not if they were serious about escalating things. My only option was to get help from the one person who might be able to make sense of what was unfolding, the detective who appeared to be leading the warehouse murder investigation based on recent news reports. Detective Anthony Rivera met me in a secluded corner booth of a dimly lit diner, his craggy features attempting a reassuring look masking the permanent weariness etched into his eyes. As I shakily tipped out the contents of my backpack, every scrap of video, photos, and physical evidence I'd amassed from my night's trespassing, along with a detailed recounting of the disturbing events since. Rivera said nothing, didn't even bat an eye. He simply refilled his coffee mug, set down the pot, and slowly nodded. I was afraid this might happen, the detective sighed at last. We've been pursuing leads that suggest there may be a sprawling underground network of crime syndicates based here, with ties to organized crime cabals around the globe. The warehouse district is in their crosshairs to establish a foothold, given how much derelict real estate it provides to lay low. He leaned forward, fixing me with an intense look. We believe your little archival venture into these abandoned areas may have captured footage of either a high-ranking member or surrogate engaged in activities tied to this clandestine operation. I felt a fresh surge of nausea as the detective continued. This alleged group pursues control at all costs, through fear, intimidation, you name it. If they suspect you know something that could jeopardize their ambitions in this city, they'll simply remove you from the equation. Rivera shook his head gravely. Trust me, we've seen what they're capable of, and they will stop at nothing to expand their hold. So what am I supposed to do? I whispered, barely able to keep my fraying nerves under control any longer. Go into hiding? Turn myself in as a witness? Lay low. Don't go out unnecessarily. Keep your doors locked, Detective Rivera advised. But, more importantly, don't lose faith that we're going to catch these bastards. Based on what you've brought me, we may finally have enough leverage to blow this thing wide open once and for all. Rivera slid a plain manila envelope across the table. One of our decoys will be stationed near your apartment round the clock for when these creeps inevitably make their next move. All you have to do is signal them if or when you feel danger closing in. As I stood on trembling legs to leave, the grizzled detective caught my arm. The hardness had fallen away, replaced by an unmistakable look of deep concern. Just watch your back, kid, he cautioned. These people, they're ruthless vultures. They've got the inexorable power of cockroaches. Survive anything, infest any dark crevice. The second I arrived back home, the shadows seemed to close in around me, leering from every corner. Despite chaining the door securely shut, I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak and whisper of the apartment complex had me jolting upright, my heart pounding in terror of the unthinkable fate Rivera had warned could await me. Just after midnight, the piercing sound of my fire alarm wailed into the stillness. Toxic black smoke was flooding in from somewhere, choking and blinding me before I could even react. Through stinging eyes, I saw leaping orange flames beginning to devour the living room carpet. Screaming for help, I collapsed into a ball, head swimming while desperately gulping what little clean air remained. Just as the blackness closed in, a deafening crash shook the apartment. Burly silhouettes flooded in, grasping shadowy weapons with glinting edges. That's when the gruff voice barked out in the smoky haze. "Target secure, let's move!" Strong hands seized me roughly and dragged me through the pandemonium. The last thing I glimpsed before the welcome void of unconsciousness swept over my senses was the flashing red and blue lights of an arriving police cruiser illuminating the chaos outside. Had Rivera's promised backup arrived just in time? Or had I been plucked from hope's grasp by the merciless claws of evil itself? Oblivion tugged at my senses, the inky blackness beckoning me to succumb and simply drift away from consciousness. But something kept pulling me back, an incessant pounding at the edges of my mind. As my eyes fluttered open, blurred shapes gradually took form against the dim lighting. I was in some kind of dank, cramped chamber, the air thick with moisture and the unmistakable stench of mold. My wrists were bound tightly behind me to the rickety chair I was slumped in. Panic surged through me as the reality of the situation came screaming back in full force. My captors! They must have been watching, waiting to snatch me once the flames and smoke had me disoriented. But how? Why go to such extremes? Then I remembered Detective Rivera's grim warnings about this vicious crime cabal, the depths they would stoop to solidify their nefarious grip over the city. A sudden scraping of metal against concrete snapped my head up to squint against the dim lighting. There, ambling out of the shadows, was a hulking, broad-shouldered figure. The menacing silhouette from my videos brought hideously to life. It approached with slow, predatory movements, each footfall reverberating heavily. "Well, what do you want from me?" My voice was little more than a ragged whisper, belying the howling terror coursing through me. The dark shape rumbled out a wheezing chuckle that raised goosebumps along my arms. "You've stuck your nose where it doesn't belong, little mouse. Seen too much of what lies behind the curtain." It closed the remaining distance between us until I could make out the gnarled, weathered features beneath the hood's shadow, a face that seemed almost inhuman, as if it had been carved from well-aged leather and tree bark rather than flesh and bone. A trio of jagged scars trailed down the left cheek, giving the appearance of wicked crimson grinning slits in certain light. "Now comes the time to pay the price for your insatiable curiosity," the thing growled in a voice like tectonic plates grinding together. "After I'm through with you, there won't be a scrap of evidence left for the good detective to latch onto." As impossibly strong hands clamped down around my throat, a deep, slow panic began to set in. This was really happening. I was going to die down here in this forsaken pit, my final memories tainted with unimaginable agony. With a last burst of desperation, I thrashed and kicked with everything I had left. But the crushing force around my windpipe only intensified as the red slits curled into a gruesome rictus of a grin under the hood. "The darkness has seen fit to reclaim you, wandering fool," the raspy voice rumbled, almost reverently. "And the Unbound will be waiting on the other side to collect your—" A deafening crash cut the gravelly tones short as the chamber's steel door exploded inward in a blossom of fire and shattered concrete. Figures in body armor poured through the smoke and debris, weapons raised and barking orders to freeze. My captor whirled away from me in surprise, and the meaty hands slipped from my throat. With a gasping, ragged breath, I glimpsed the unmistakable barrel of a beanbag shotgun leveled at the looming creature's chest. "You lose, dirtbag," Detective Rivera's gruff voice called out as he stepped through the chaos, pistol trained on the heaving, shadowy mass before us. "It's over." The hooded beast swiveled its horrific gaze back to me, those crimson slits locking onto me with terrifying intensity. "This isn't the end." The voice almost seemed to caress in my mind like a lover's whisper. The Unbound walk among us all now, waiting for the curtain to rise. Before the words could continue echoing through my skull, the beanbag round slammed into the creature with the force of a sledgehammer, doubling it over and sending the hulking shape crashing to the floor in a tangled heap. Rivera was on it in a flash, snapping titanium cuffs into place with grim satisfaction. In the aftermath, as a trio of blaring ambulances arrived on the scene to cart the semi-conscious criminal away, I stayed huddled in the corner, shaking uncontrollably. Rivera draped a shock blanket over my shoulders, squeezing my arm in a reassuring gesture. "You're safe now, kid," he said simply. "We've got enough to put this psycho away for life, and to drive a stake through the heart of this whole sordid underground empire." Yet even as I nodded weakly, some dark instinct told me this was only the beginning, as if a veil had been lifted ever so slightly to expose the wriggling chaos lurking just on the other side. What unfathomable evil had the detectives' team unwittingly unleashed upon an unsuspecting world? Rivera would reassure me in the coming days and months that the burned husk of a man was nothing more than a deranged ringleader of an intricate web of criminal operations. But I could never shake those feverish whispers of something far more ancient. A slumbering presence now stirred in the depths. My nightly terrors always ended the same, waking up paralyzed as the very shadows in the room seemed to twist and thrash with dim, hulking shapes trying to break free, accompanied by an incessant chorus of slithering, sibilant voices. "When the veil tears, the Unbound shall walk again."
If you found this content interesting, show your support by liking the video and hitting the subscribe button for more paranormal tales.